The Baltimore Ravens have revamped their offensive unit over the course of the 2023 offseason so far. And we talk about how those offensive upgrades will make their defense better this upcoming year. All that and more coming up next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire. We're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here, making us your first listen every day. We're free and available all podcasting platforms, including over in video form on YouTube. And thank you for tuning in with us today and for all the support, whether you're an everyday or you listen here every day. If it's your first time listening to the show, welcome in. And if you're somewhere in between, thank you for all your support as well. 5 days a week, Ravens podcast here, where we talk about Ravens news, analysis, updates, even in the lull period of the offseason. We're waiting for training camp, waiting for the preseason, waiting for the regular season, but we still have lots to talk about regardless here on this show. Today, we're going to be talking a bit about the Ravens offense and how I think it's going to make their defense better. Marlon Humphrey talked about that on the Rich Eisen's show. He had a bunch of points he made. I'm going to make points of my own too, but Marlon Humphrey, well, I think was very right in what he had to say. So we'll talk about how the Ravens revamped offense, their offensive upgrades will make their defense better this upcoming season. Then in the second part of the show, I want to switch over to the actual offensive side of the ball and talk a bit about Isaiah Likely. He's somebody who was spotted at tight end university. You know, something they've been doing for the past. It's been a while since they started doing that, but Isaiah Likely was spotted in the background in one of the videos. So I want to talk a bit about Isaiah Likely's role this year. And then finally, I want to talk about the excitement surrounding this team right now. Obviously, I think it's a lot. We've talked about how the offense is better, the defense hoping to stay on track with what they did at the end of last season. There's a lot of excitement. So I want to talk about that excitement moving forward here in the final part of the show. So plenty to dive into today, and we will talk about it all and dive into it. Let's first start off with better offense means better defense for the Ravens. And Marlon Humphrey, again, went on the Rich Eisen show and talked a little bit about how he believes this is the case. And he said, quote, "There's not much relaxing in practice anymore. You got to be ready to go," which is really good for both sides. I think Eric DeCosta in the front office, what they've done this offseason has been really good as far as putting our quarterback in a great position, paying our quarterback, getting some weapons for him, and even on defense, getting some weapons. Also said, quote, "I think it'll be a really fun season. It'll be some really competitive training camp practices. Might be some fights out there. It might be a war out there, but I'm really excited to get that work in practice." And so I agree with everything Marlon Humphrey did say there. It's the whole iron sharpens iron thing, right? It's kind of, oh, that's such a cheesy thing. Everybody says that, but it's true. I mean, with the Ravens, we've talked about it with the defense, where their defense has been so good over the course of, however many years it's been now. For the most part, obviously some parts have not been great, but for the most part, we always talked about how, Rashad Bateman going up against Marlon Humphrey is really good for Rashad Bateman because he's able to get better against one of the best cornerbacks in the league on a day-to-day basis in practice. We've talked about that with Humphrey for a while now. It's the same thing on the offensive side of the ball, where with Odell there, like the Odell versus Marlon Humphrey reps are going to be really good for both players. So it's the same thing, with Zay Flowers on Marlon Humphrey if they get reps against one another. Still true for Rashad Bateman. Those iron sharpen iron aspects is real. So with that, I think with Baltimore's offensive system also being a bit more diverse, I think a bit more with what the team wants to do. I don't know if Greg Roman's offense fully was what players wanted to buy into there. I think that it's going to be really big for the defense in particular because they're going to be able to get better every single day against that offensive unit, much like the offense is going to be able to get better every single day against that defense. So that's one aspect where I think the better offense will lead to a better defense. And I agree with Humphrey in the estimation that, going up against those guys every single day, especially in training camp when you're trying to work out some of the things, like mistakes happen in training camp. You want to have them happen in training camp. And if the offense torches you one day, doesn't count as a win, doesn't count as a loss, doesn't count as a tie. It's all in training camp. You can get those mistakes out then, which is huge. I think another area, though, which I want to make the point of, is the offense scoring points in staying on the field and those long sustained drives we've seen. I don't know, they're not going to run the ball every single play and run, 8, 9, 10, 11 minutes off the clock like I think they used to, but I don't think that's I think that's a fine trade-off with just a more diverse offense. But regardless, the Ravens scoring points and putting up just really long drives if they're able to will help the defense out. I mean, if you score more points, that's better for your defense. I think your defense playing with the lead, especially for Baltimore's defense playing with the lead, we saw was really lethal. And with the way they performed last season towards the end of it, I think we saw so much potential, and they did a lot of great things too, but so much potential for how they could be this season. Or look, their offense, if they're on the field longer, the defense has more time to rest and recover. Maybe the defense gives up a long drive to an opponent, right? And you're wondering, well, if they have to go back out there in 3 plays, if the offense has a 3 and out, if Lamar, if it's a running play, then incomplete, and Lamar's offense is off the field in 3 downs, well, the defense has to trot back out there. They're exhausted. They're tired. If the offense is putting up points and winning the time possession battle, essentially, the defense is going to be better rested. They're going to have more opportunity for success because of that. And they're not going to be, hands on their knees, breathing and saying, we got to go back out there again. They're going to be refreshed. And I think with the Ravens defense, something I've talked about a lot on this show, if you're an everydayer, you know this, is the Ravens love their rotations. But if you're able to rest your core guys more, there's not necessarily as much of a need to run super heavy rotations. Like corner-wise, they don't necessarily have a 3-corner rotation I would trust right now. If they brought back Marcus Peters, that would be a different story. They're not going to, apparently. But it's those corner rotations, the defensive line rotations, for example. Maybe you can even the safety rotations, with Geno Stone in there, with Kyle Hamilton and Marcus Williams. That aspect of just being a better rested defense and not having to go back on the field after every 3 or 4 plays is going to help out immensely. So there are multiple avenues to where this defense can get better, not just because, they've added a couple pieces here and there. They have a year under Mike McDonald, but there's literal just the offense being better makes the defense better by proxy. And look, is all this stuff going to have a massive impact on winning? I think it could. Now, it's not going to be the be-all, end-all. The defense has to go out there when they're on the field and show out and perform. But with Humphrey's points and with some of the stuff I said there, this defense has the potential. We saw how good they were to end last season. We saw that Cincinnati game where nobody gave them a shot in the wild card round, right? I feel like this defense is kind of almost built for Cincinnati in a way. Now, corner-wise, we're going to find that out in either a really good way or a really bad way. But it feels like this Ravens defense has so much potential this year to build on what they did last year. It took a little while, right? We saw the Miami game, as I've talked about. We saw a couple of those late game collapses, some offensive, some defensive. But with, I think, the stuff that we saw towards the end of last year, there's so much to like about what Humphrey can do, what Roquan Smith can do in his second season in this defense. He'll have the half year now of his first full season. Patrick Queen next to him, the defensive line rotation with Rock Ya-Sin and the safeties, as I talked about. And what can Odafe Owe do and David Ojabo do? If you have to put Odafe Owe and David Ojabo out there, and especially with them being essentially only 3 deep at outside linebacker right now, if you have to put those guys out there every 3 plays, every 5 plays, and they're just going to be tired, and they have to go out there and play like that, it's much better if you put them out there well rested. Marlon Humphrey, same thing. Roquan Smith, same thing. There is a real advantage to just being better rested as a defense, and it's the same thing on offense, where I think you want your defense to get 3 and outs to get your offense on the field as quickly as possible. But it's the same thing because look, if the offense sustains long drives, then the opposing defense ends up getting tired. And then if the defense is able to get 3 and outs because they're well rested because of the offense, then that opposing defense has to go back out there really tired. Yeah, I think Baltimore's offense will lead to a better Ravens defense this season, which is awesome because more points, better defense. It's a recipe for success for Baltimore for sure in 2023. But coming up in the second part of the show, part of the Ravens offensive success and how they can make that defense better, I think is Isaiah Likely, a very underrated player in what the Ravens can do on offense this year. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to talk about on Locked On Ravens coming up. But first, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. And baseball season is in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets. If your first bet doesn't win, just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to join today. And those Orioles, Aaron Hicks has been on absolute fire. So if you want to put some props on the board with Aaron Hicks, maybe you want Adley Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson, you can parlay those guys together. Be sure to do that over at FanDuel, so don't miss your chance to snag a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel, official partner of Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball trademarks use permission. We're back here, our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Ostraker still here with you, getting you through this Thursday as we're close to Purple Friday. Friday is on the horizon, so stay strong. We're almost there. And for this second part of the show on Thursday, we're going to be taking you through Isaiah Likely and his potential role. There's a lot of excitement, I think, surrounding Isaiah Likely. Speaking of excitement, be sure to stay tuned for the final segment as we'll talk about the full excitement surrounding Baltimore's team this year. But Likely someone who was caught, well, not necessarily caught, but he was spotted at tight end university where a lot of tight ends gather. I think, who was it? Travis Kelce and George Kittle put it together. And, tight ends from across the league show up. And it's just, it's a way that the tight ends can make each other better. It's actually a really cool concept. Isaiah Likely, there was a video put out. Travis Kelce was explaining something. And you can see Isaiah Likely in the back and soaking up all the information from there. And there are a decent amount of tight ends there. Isaiah Likely, one of them. And it's big. I think everybody wants to see how Isaiah Likely is going to be used this year. There's a lot of potential with him. We know when he was drafted out of Coastal Carolina, it was interesting because the Ravens, they ran their heavy personnel stuff, but we saw in the preseason the flashes of him as a receiver, but the blocking wasn't necessarily there. He got better at that as the year went on. And as he got snaps, he wasn't a total liability in that aspect. But I think something that he could improve on, and hopefully he has improved on as we get ready for 2023, is that blocking, where if he can put that together with his receiving skills, I think he's in for a really big year. Now, you might be thinking about the offensive system the Ravens are going to run now. We're going to see a lot more receiver-heavy sets, less running, less heavy personnel most likely. Doesn't mean they're going away from the run game or heavy personnel entirely. But look, we know this is Mark Andrews' room. Mark Andrews is the number one guy for tight ends in this offense. He honestly might be the number one guy again as a receiver in this offense, which I would not be mad about. He's really good at it. But Likely is that guy right now who, has all the potential in the world, but the role for him is going to be as a complementary piece. And that's fine. He can still contribute in that way. And I'm really excited to see what he can do. Now, last year, Isaiah Likely didn't put up a ton of numbers, but when he was on the field, he produced. He had 60 targets, 36 receptions for 373 yards and 3 touchdowns. Now, again, when Mark Andrews was on the field, he didn't necessarily have those huge games where it was, 8 for 131 or 7 for 100 or something. But when Andrews went down, we saw a player that took over that role and racked up yards, racked up catches, racked up touchdowns. And to me, the Ravens can use Isaiah Likely in so many different ways. He's not just an inline player. You can put him in these wide receiver sets on the outside. You can put him in the slot. And that's where I'm really excited because, look, you do have Odell Beckham and Rashad Bateman and Zay Flowers and Devin Duvernay and Nelson Aguilar and all those guys. But there's an opportunity for the Ravens to create mismatches on the outside, create mismatches in the slot with the 6'4" frame of Isaiah Likely, measuring in around 6'4", 240 pounds. He's an athlete in every sense of the word, has speed to his game a little bit, big contested catch radius. He goes up for the football, can come down with it too. In the open field, we saw him, cut and make defenders miss and, break some ankles. He has that open field ability too. He's an all-around really good player who I expect to have improved during the offseason. I think we see it here with him participating in tight end university, learning from some of the best at the position. Honestly, we talked about the better offense, better defense, the iron sharpens iron thing. The fact that Isaiah Likely gets to work with Mark Andrews every day is huge. We can talk about Charlie Kolar too. I don't want to just, toss Charlie Kolar to the side here and say he's not going to be important. He's going to be really important too. Both of those guys, Likely and Kolar, just because the Ravens have Todd Monken in now instead of Greg Roman, just because we're going to see them throw the ball more, does not mean that, well, they're only going to run one tight end now because, you have to give Andrews his targets, right? You're not going to just phase him out of the offense. The passing game ran through the tight ends last year under Greg Roman. We knew that for multiple seasons. This was not a wide receiver-centric passing offense. It ran through the tight ends. We're going to see that shift, I think, to wide receivers and that being the focal point. Not saying Mark Andrews won't be, but I think with Likely, just because Todd Monken's in does not mean Likely's role gets eliminated and there's no room for him to grow in this offense. He could easily top his totals from last year. Over 36 receptions, over 373 yards, and over 3 touchdowns. I mean, I think to me, he's someone that, look, if Andrews does have to miss a couple games, he showed that he can be a number one tight end in this league. I think a lot of teams would be happy to have a guy like Isaiah Likely on their roster with just the versatility he has, both, I think, as a pass catcher and as a blocker. Again, I think the blocking has to improve a little bit, but we did see it get better over the course of the year last year. So to me, Likely is a player that I'm personally really excited about. He's one of my sleeper guys in fantasy too, like a late round tight end prospect. Again, it's not going to be the guy in this offense at that position until Mark Andrews leaves, which at this point, I hope Mark Andrews is a Raven for life. But as a number 2 complimentary guy in this offense, it's good to have him as like you know what? We have him in our back pockets. The Ravens are saying that to themselves. Like, oh yeah, we got this chess piece in our back pocket. We can use in all these different aspects. The Ravens are probably licking their chops right now. Todd Monken, with all the players he has, with the offensive upgrades we talked about, Odell and Zay Flowers, we forget sometimes. I think they get all the attention, which is fine. Like, they deserve attention. But guys like Andrews, guys like Bateman, like Duvernay, like Likely, those guys who were there last season, it's not like they're just going to be phased out for the new guys. The new guys will come in there and they'll have their own roles. Likely, to me, as a player to have a big breakout year, maybe not in the sense of always going to catch 100 passes for 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns, but someone who could break out, especially if he's needed in more situations where, you're looking at him as an outside guy, as a receiver for a couple snaps a game, is in the slot for a couple snaps a game, finding ways to utilize his skill set, finding ways to utilize guys' skill sets is one of the best things Todd Monken does. Like he is one of the best at doing that, finding ways to put the guys he has in successful roles that fit what they can do well and maximize their strengths. That to me is something I'm really excited about with Likely, because he has all this oozing potential that's coming out of him right now. And honestly, I am so excited to see what he can bring to the table this year. In year 2, he's had a year. I always want to say in the offense, but it's a new offense this year. But a year with the team, a year catching some passes from Lamar Jackson. And that's another interesting thing about the whole thing with Isaiah Likely, because I remember in the preseason last year we were talking about Isaiah Likely and the connection. And I said, well, wait, they're going to have to establish something in actual game action because Lamar didn't play in the preseason. So it was Tyler Huntley and Anthony Brown and all these guys throwing to him that weren't Lamar Jackson. I don't anticipate Lamar playing in the preseason again this year, but we saw that connection with Lamar come to fruition a little bit over the course of the season last year. So them building on that, to me, is going to be a really underrated aspect. So Likely to me is going to be a really underrated player in this offense, and I'm excited to see how the Ravens utilize him this year. But coming up in the final part of the show, again, speaking of excitement, we're going to talk about the excitement surrounding this Ravens team right now. So be sure to stay tuned. Plenty to talk about on Locked On Ravens. We're back here, our final segment of Locked On Ravens Thursday edition. Kevin Ostreicher still here with you. Thank you so much again for tuning in with us, making us your first listen every day on Locked On Ravens. Be sure to subscribe, follow along in audio form. You can follow along in video form too if you're listening on your way from work, on your way to work, however you're listening in audio form. I appreciate that. And in video form, if you're watching on the big screen on your phone, I appreciate it however you're choosing to watch today. But it's exciting. I think there's a lot of excitement surrounding Baltimore. I know it was a very uncertain offseason this year with the whole Lamar Jackson situation. Would he be the Ravens quarterback? It's just, I'm very glad that we're in the position we are right now, and we talk about this team, because it could have been a whole lot different with Lamar maybe being on a different team, the Ravens having wide receiver problems again, even like a Greg Roman staying and having his stay overextended by the Ravens. I think it honestly already was, to be honest, but that's neither here nor there at this point. It happened. We can move forward now with Todd Monken when talking about the Ravens. But there's a lot of excitement. And Cole Jackson, one of the friends of the show, he put out a tweet and said, quote, "This is hands down the most I've been excited for a Ravens season. The offense is going to be completely different. The defense, those dogs everywhere. No more contract drama. Time to let the play do the talking. Next 3 months can't go quicker." And look, I agree with Cole here. So shout out to you, Cole, for putting out your excitement. I'm excited as well. And part of the reason is everything Cole listed, obviously I agree with, but just the fact that the Ravens feel like true contenders this year. Obviously, health has to go their way. It takes a lot to win a championship. We talked about that a couple of weeks ago, right after the Denver Nuggets won their championship. We kind of compared it. But Baltimore feels like a true contender this year in an AFC that's loaded. Like the AFC is absolutely loaded this year. And I think we can confidently say that Baltimore is in that true contender status. We've talked throughout the last couple of weeks about, well, will Baltimore be in the playoffs or are they contenders? AFC North implications. Baltimore's in, there are so many teams you can put in like the quote unquote big four. I think Buffalo, Kansas City, and Cincinnati are in there for sure. But then, people go back and forth about, is Baltimore that fourth team in the big four? Is it Miami? Is it Jacksonville? Is it Denver, Los Angeles? I put Baltimore in there. Again, health permitting, with a healthy Lamar Jackson, healthy Odell Beckham, healthy Rashad Bateman, healthy J.K. Dobbins, healthy everybody. Baltimore, to me, is at the true top of the contenders list. And you can put those four teams in all the order you want to. Obviously, in the NFC, you have teams like Philadelphia and San Francisco. But the fact that Baltimore this year, hopefully with a cleaner bill of health compared to what they've had over the past 2 seasons. Baltimore's health wasn't totally terrible last year, but losing Lamar hurt. Losing Bateman and Duvernay obviously hurt as well. The couple of other injuries they went through over the course of the year, whether it be season-ending ones or just guys getting banged up. If Baltimore's able to stay healthier this season, there is a lot of room for them to, I think, shock the league. And, they're not total underdogs this year. Like, I don't think they're getting absolutely blatantly disrespected, but there's a little disrespect when I think everybody's hyper-focused on, Kansas City and Cincinnati and Buffalo and everything, Philadelphia, and rightfully so. Those teams are all very good. But for Baltimore, it just feels like Lamar Jackson's been injured the past 2 seasons at the end of those years. He's almost being written off as such. And he has gotten some media love, but I think he has gotten snubbed in some other places. We see Marlon Humphrey constantly getting left off of lists, and Patrick Queen and his lists getting left off there too. And look, lists are lists, right? The team cares about what they care about in their building. They don't care about the outside noise, and they never have. It's not a huge deal to them whatsoever. But I think people in general are sleeping on how good this team can actually be. Are they going to win every game? No, they're not going to win every game. Are they going to go 16-1? No, probably not, right? This is a team that I think it could be in that 12-5-ish range to 14-3. The records are still kind of, I'm trying to still figure out the 17 game records. I'm so used to saying, oh, they'll be 14-2 or 13-3, but no, it's 13-4 now. But regardless, I think Baltimore has a lot to be excited about this year with the way this offense looks. First of all, I mean, we talked about how their offense is revamped. It's honestly, hopefully going to be better this year. But with Odell coming in, with Zay Flowers, it just has felt like for so long this team has not been a receiver destination. I think a lot of that has had to do with Greg Roman and the offensive system they run. I always go back to Juju Smith-Schuster in the podcast he did with Michael Irvin. If you're an everydayer, you're so tired of me telling the story, but I'm going to tell it anyway. But Juju went on that podcast and essentially said, I love Lamar. I would love to play with Lamar, but the system to me is not a fit. They run the ball too much essentially. And, that's not exactly what he said, but, me paraphrasing essentially was, he loves Lamar, but doesn't love the system. Feels like Odell wanted to come here. And look, money talks. I understand that. He got a huge, I did not think Odell Beckham Jr. would get anywhere near the deal he got from the Ravens. So good on him for doing it. But money talks. And so Odell came here, I think one, because he wanted to play with Lamar, but, for a couple other reasons too. Zay Flowers coming, and obviously he didn't necessarily choose to come to the Ravens. He was drafted, but he's someone who has already bought into the culture here, it feels like. And also Nelson Aguilar signing a deal, up to $6 million. I think that maybe 6.25 was that deal. So there's a lot to be excited about with the way that Todd Monken can utilize those guys, as I talked about with Isaiah Likely, with the offense he's going to get the best out of these guys. And the fact that there's already a trust factor between him and Lamar Jackson, with him essentially handing the keys over to Lamar, as we've heard from Monken, from John Harbaugh, from Lamar himself, that to me is very exciting, where we're not going to see, oh, we're getting to the line here if you're the Ravens, and look, Lamar's looking up and he has 2 seconds. Lamar's saying to himself, oh, I got to throw the ball. I got to, hey, let's go. There's not going to be that. Hopefully, I'm praying there's not going to be that this season. And then defensively, I don't just want to talk about offense. Defensively, as I talked about in the first part of the show, the Ravens showed a lot to me in the back half of last season. I expected some growing pains from a new defense, a new defensive coordinator, an NFL defensive coordinator, someone who had a great year at Michigan the year prior, comes back to the Ravens, is the defensive coordinator this time. And we saw some aspects where you'd like to see a bit better play calling, a bit better use of personnel, but that was to be expected for a new NFL defensive coordinator. And honestly, someone who was so young in that position. But now he has experience, Mike McDonald does. The defense remains mostly the same. They lose Chuck Clark. They lose Calais Campbell. Both guys are not small losses, but they have other guys who can step up. They signed Rock Yassin. Marcus Peters also essentially not going to be there by all accounts. But to me, this is a team that just has an aura around it. And to me, it's the vibes. Like, I'm not excited for the vibes. It's something I've talked about where the vibes just seemed off last year, whether it was Lamar or the team in general. Just didn't really feel like they were having as much fun in the back half of the year as I would have liked to see, as many people would like to see. I mean, early on, it was, I think, fun. Like the first game against the Jets was fun. That was a good vibe game. But then, it just felt like the vibes were off last year. Feels like, to me at least, and I don't know how everybody feels about this, but to me, the vibes are back. It feels like things are pointing up for the Ravens. And hopefully, again, health plays a huge factor for any professional sports organization to win a championship. The Ravens have to stay healthy this year if they want to have a realistic shot of going far. They can still win without health. Like, it's possible, but having a healthy roster increases your chances so much. So that to me is an aspect where, look, Steve Saunders no longer in the building. Honestly, should not have been in the building for the past couple of seasons, but again, you move forward and what's done is done. But hopefully with some better training practices, the Ravens will be able to keep their guys on the field. I know they tried so hard last year. John Harbaugh tried so hard last year with moving the practices in training camp from the morning to the afternoon, just, trying so many different things. And, I think the health compared to 2021, anything would have been better unless it was just an absolute catastrophe. But to me, Baltimore has so much potential this year. I'm super excited. A lot of people are excited for it, and I can't wait to see how they perform this year in 2023. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in with us today. When we get back here tomorrow, we'll be rounding out the week with Purple Friday, more Ravens talk from us. So be sure to stay tuned, and I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.